Contention was the background of the East, what is that tensions in Burundi are narrows the side of ethnic violence since the 1990s between the Hutus and the Tutsis. This is violence that's spilled over from the north border that Burundi shares with Rwanda. The Beast point is that there has been at least a coup inside the country, which indicates that the balance of power and the status quo continued. Violence between the opposition forces and the government is an indication that in the status quo violence will attempt to increase. That's the plan text. The African Union should deploy approved deployment of the East African Standby Force in Burundi under Section 5 of their mission scenarios. Again, the African Union should approve deployment of the East African Standby Force in Burundi under Section 5 of their mission scenarios. Contention 2 solves the Ace points that there's no chance that they would increase ethnic tensions or anything like they are composed of military from 10 different East African countries. The piece of point is that Section 5 is a genocide prevention protocol that is operates under the East African Standby Force that indicates that when a certain amount of tensions are increasing and violence is happening between the government and the civilians, that genocide prevention best in place. The piece of point is that they have decades of military experience in the regions where this comes, which means that they are able to overcome cultural barriers that international actors are not, because they don't understand the language, culture, and other aspects of the physical and political aspect of the climate. The piece of point is that there's not a high level of violence in the status quo, but their military operations are limited to deter the escalation of violence that currently exists. The contention 3 is genocide. Sub 1A is that daily structural violence in the status quo is increasing, and it's cementing factionalism. The first part is the government and opposition forces showing out and killing, kidnapping and torturing one another in an attempt to display dominance over the other. This has increased rhetorical violence among the government and other media acquisitions that have attempted to label the opposite forces as terrorists, despite their civil goals. The second is the government is about to be able to ramp up its fascist anti-terror policies that have offered the civilians a chance to surrender, but the government is going to extreme powers to eliminate dissidents in the future if they do not give up their weapons. The third argument is that they will not give up their ability to be able to, they will not give up their ability because they perceive these anti-terror policies as the epitome of what they are fighting against, which is an indication that they will simply escalate their violence in response to these particular actions. The fourth argument is that genocide in your proximity is increasing tensions. Violence at the DST has continued for almost a recent increase as a result of violation of the Dodd-Frank Act in the United States and other economic interests allowed for genocide to increase. The Sudanese genocide has also been occurring for over a decade, but because the AU refuses to classify it as a genocide, they're not talking about it, which allows for it to be overshadowed, which is making tensions infinitely worse, because the longer that these conflicts continue to take place, the worse the violence gets as the populations become even more desperate. Authoritarianism rises as a response. The beast point is the plan solves. The first argument of Burundi tensions will increase inevitably without moderation. The extent of government will not take action because in the status quo they're not a deployment to be able to avoid things that be able to avoid the coming genocide. The ace point is that deploy now is key to avoid a repeat of Rwanda. What happened in Rwanda was basically that there was a debate about whether or not what was happening in Rwanda would become a genocide, and then when it actually started becoming a genocide, they would not define it as a genocide, which meant that they refused to invade and refused to actually stop the violence, which allowed it to continue for years. The second argument, this would be the first major deployment of the forces which removes that would remove UN control and bureaucracy. The status quo, the East African Standby Force and the African Union in general waits for United Nations approval, but this bureaucratic structure prevents us from actually taking action to solve violence that's happening in the status quo, which is an indication that East African Standby Force agency and autonomy to be able to solve problems without the permission of the West is necessary. The third argument is that that these practices will be modeled by the North, South, and Central and Western East African Standby Forces, because those are different factions of the African Union, which is an indication that they would be able to have more effective policies in the future. The point is that genocide is bad.
Really? Yeah.
Who knew, right?
Spoilers. Spoilers.
The first argument is that passing anti-terror policies ultimately leads to an escalation. The second point is that the government boosting power would indicate that they would cause an increased recruitment by the opposition forces, because they would be ceding to the ideal position of what the state is not supposed to look like according to the opposition. The second point is that this escalation ultimately leads to more intervention by international institutions, because they would simply label the African Union as being insolvent, and that would lead to more Western intervention in the future, would allow for the conflict to escalate, because individuals don't have, because those institutions don't have the cultural connections that the African Union does to those particular regions, which means that they would essentialize and reduce those populations to something that's packageable for them to be able to prevent. The second argument is the act of genocide is ultimately accountable. The violence that is experienced there in the epidatus is not possible to be able to represent, but however, we can represent that the act of genocide in and of itself is necessarily bad, something that should be prevented. The point is that the post-Rwandan genocide media representations were necessarily worse than the discussions about whether or not there should be a prevention strategy to be able to solve for violence, because they depicted the entirety of Africa Africa as this unstable continent that was just one big culture of violence, but the prevention strategies were simply a discussion about whether or not this localized situation was important to solve. The biggest point is that focusing on the more immediate institutions of violence that are happening in the status quo is necessarily to be able to have an ethical orientation towards violence. If we do not ethically actually resolve these kinds of structural violence, we will always allow them to continue from the periphery because we push them to the outside as being something that is insignificant or less important than other forms of violence. This is the culture of Western privilege that allows us to be able to say that something is not as important as economic growth or other forms of political violence that is absolutely an impact in and of itself, because the refusal to act makes ethics impossible because we never have a relationship with them. We continue to force framing. The eighth one is the role of the balance to endorse probable ethical solutions to probable violence. The role of the balance to endorse ethical solutions to probable violence. The first argument is that probability has to come first. The eighth point is that if you do not evaluate probabilistic impacts, that means that we are always focused on high magnitude impacts that prevents us from being able to actually about things that are happening in the status quo. The second argument, ethics are key to being able to challenge the system of Western privilege that promotes a profit first and short-termism, that it prevents us from being able to access whether or not these violence are necessarily bad or whether it should whether the plan should happen. The eighth point is that war is obsolete. The first argument is diplomacy checks. The international community is engaged in international institutions that allow for state-on-state violence to be obsolete, which allows them for them to have negotiations and moderation. The second argument is that international institutions like international law and the United Nations negotiates international escalation of conflict, but doesn't ever talk about structural violence, which means that the escalation of war is extremely unlikely. The third argument is nuclear weapons would never be launched. Post Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there has been a taboo on the use of nuclear weapons. No country is willing to violate it because they're absent, because the use of that would alienate literally every ally they have. The CISA point is that you should not evaluate extinction. The first argument is that high magnitude impacts ultimately impose a tyranny of survival that prevent us from being able to make decisions. There's 1% risk that every day you get out of bed you will break a leg, but chances are you don't evaluate that 1% risk. That's why low risk should be rounded down to no risk, because anything is possible, but only what is probable is what should be considered from any policy-making perspective. The second argument is that focus on a distinction level of fast time frame and to dead portable skills, because it prevents us from being able to understand structural violence that happens in the status quo. We always push this to be something invisible because we never understand that because it's happening right now, it is necessarily important, whereas we always can construct fantasies of the future that don't actually exist, but because violence exists in the status quo, we have, in order to be ethical, we have to take action to solve it.
If I usually all stand.
Okay.
Hey, what's the role about again? Sorry.
Endorse an ethical solution to probable violence.
Do you want to process this though?
Yeah. Do we have more?
No, I have the code right there. No.
Sure.
Right.
Starting at whenever.
Yeah, you can start now.
There you go.
So what prevents international actors from getting involved in post-plan?
So basically, as we see, if you look to the Darfur incident, or the South Sudan incident, rather, the Sudan incident in 2009, I believe was the year, what prevented the Security Council from deploying United Nations troops was the fact that China was getting massive amounts of GDP from selling arms to the Sudanese government, so they blocked repeated Security Council efforts to do so. This is the norm for the international community, whereby they prioritize the self-interest of the select few nations that are in the Security Council.
But more importantly, post-plan, the East African Standby Force operating on its own would mean that the international community would not have a justification for intervention because they couldn't label the enemies and solve them.
So what's Burundi look like post-plan?
Burundi looks like post-plan, Rwanda didn't look like. So during what you have in Rwanda is a massive increase of tensions and basically a breakdown of civil society as they knew it. There was basically just every day your neighbor, literally the person next to you, would come kill you. Our articulation is that was allowed to happen because United Nations troops were deployed but not able to use their weapons. When these troops are there and present and there is, say, a guard on every armed street, it would be hard for these people to say, oh, let's commit this act of violence.
So does a government emerge post-plan?
Well, government is in place in post-plan, but the problem is that there is literally no place for them to take themselves out of the escalation of violence and have a constructive discussion.
And absent moderation, they feel like their only response has to be deterrence via anti-terror policies, which is why they would increase the fascist things that the opposition is fighting against, as opposed to actually moderating those discussions.
Okay.
That's why the East African.
So what prevents us from escalating post-invasion?
Okay.
Well,
Or post-withdrawal?
Okay, so what do you after the East African Standby Force leaves? Well,
Yeah.
first of all, negotiations would take place. That's under Section 5. Is that genocide prevention involves a conflict mediation between the opposition forces and state forces to get the opposition what they want and
genocide prevention, right?
This is under mission to Parameter 5, which is 5.
Genocide prevention, conflict mediation, and stabilization ops.
Sworn off.
Yeah.
Going for both here.
Spoilers.
Is there an order on case, Mike?
I might talk about it. Probably not.
Respect.
If I have time, I don't think I will.
Warn me about the hyperreal.
I think we're just gonna go.
I'm not going to talk about the hyperreal. I'm not going to talk about the hyperreal. Spoiler.
You're making mistakes.
I'll still talk about Baudrillard, just not the hyperreal.
Oh, that's fine.
It's a damn shame.
These guys are so cute.
Teens.
Can you do that to the camera for me? Yeah, don't do that.
All right.
Devastating.
Are we all good now?
Yeah, it's at least 30.
First, going to be the framing of the fiat solution, the different forms of government action only frames different forms of dialogues, technocratic standpoints. The second is going to be the conversation dialectics are key to understanding the different forms of power structures, manifestations, different ways that we relate inside of the round, or key to understanding the different ways that we relate inside of the round. The third is going to be the debate allows for the deepest and deepest forms of interactions inside of this law for an understanding of how these relations and structures begin to work. Next is going to be the alternative.
The alternative is a lack of an alternative.
Excellent.
The alternative is a lack of an alternative.
This is going to be good for a few reasons. First is going to be as a break away from different forms of normal relation that causes different forms of divide inside of the population and form inside of outgroups a different way that we always have to say I have a relationship to you and I have a relationship to you, but never the different dividing point, never the different points that allow for you all to have a collaboration together. The second is going to be a transfer away from the different ways and how we begin to transfer away from how we constantly try to fill as a different way to fill in the relations with a method of familiarity. So we have, if we detract from the different forms, the vice that exists inside of it, we're able to find different forms of familiarity that didn't exist in the abstract. The third is going to be the absence is a way to separate different forms of relations as they exist now and create a unique form of different forms of relationships. Next is going to be on the solve and see why this is important. The first is going to be that a lack of relations is a natural impossible exchange that leaves different forms of hegemonic practices vulnerable to viewpoints. Impossible exchanges assist from recurrent symbolic interactions that ebb and flow between our social and political spheres. Is the idea that we place is made on society and onto society that can never be commodified, can never be exchanged. Is that we place a different way for us to transform our social interactions. We want them to exchange our different forms of social interactions for an act of nothingness, and that's something they'll ever do, and that creates a unique form of fissures to allow for a unique form of radical openness to take place, for us to understand the different forms of ideologies that exist on both sides, to allow for a better understanding to see it's going to be that change of values and holding on to these signs to a system that can no longer recognize them, that the system currently cannot recognize the different forms of relations that are held inside of it. It's just a question of how these different forms of interactions begin to take place. The two arguments that impossible exchange creates itself.
I'll turn it for you.
That the impossible exchange recreates itself inside of the system of exchange, opening up the different forms of examination for us to understand the different forms of symbolic interaction and how it begins to take place in the world. The argument is that the placement of itself inside creates a fissure of ontology to allow for different forms of radical openness to take place, to allow for deeper understanding of the meta-ethics that gets inside of it. The C is going to be that the values, different forms of social implications of the signs and change of the orientation towards war simulation and desire allows for deeper understanding of different forms of familiarity and relations that exist inside of it. Next is going to be the links. First is that the military-industrial complex is the head of the hydra that constantly rubbing out from the fear of death and the tangential other for the methods of protection. So we constantly say that we have to have the different monopoly of webs that hold for different forms of military interaction, so we can constantly protect ourselves from the threat of the others. We go into different areas, so we can say we have different forms of fixes inside of it. The second is going to be that we see that the different reasons we constantly go into these areas as we see them as the automaton always to be fixed. They can't change themselves. Is that just as a watch begins to break, we deem that it is already being destroyed. We see them as having a unique telos, not able to begin to fix themselves. We see them as when one part begins to feel that they're not able to change back into the different normative structures, and the normative structures are how like the West is able to operate. So we deem that as being disposable and also being destroyed because they're not able to fix themselves. Saying that we always need to fix them or solve back for different ways of life. That's what allows for different forms of expansion and atrocities to happen in the first place. Next link is that genocide is specifically the way we create space between individuals, how language creates distance between in-groups and out-groups. Instead of calling it different forms of homicide or murder, you have to create a separate word for genocide, where all one people is just different forms of relations that exist inside of it for the idea that the different kinds of violence or different kinds of killing. So it's always a way to tangent ourselves from a different form of post-humanistic ideology, constantly say that we exist as a separate entity when we never exist as a singular. That's what allows for a unique form of telos to happen. Next is going to be the telos thing specifically, is that when we deem a group as being able to
to exist as different, that creates them as having a telos sense, not able to cause different formulations of change. That's what themes is, it's always being destroyed inside of the status quo. It allows them to constantly say that we have to face them and change different forms of relations or ideologies that they'll hold, or else they are going to either destroy themselves or destroy us. It's a unique kill or be killed mentality that it begins to create the five. Is that the different forms of the terrorist state acts as a dichotomy, the symptom of how we deem the other as broken and destroy the state as the way that the state is being deemed vulnerable and broken because they aren't you. Is the different reasons how the justification of why non-state and then why different forms of state actors are going to get in is just a different way as how we constantly try to say that they are us or they aren't us and can continuously deem them as existing outside. Next is the role of the ballot apartmentalization is a mentally regressive ideology to the climate of difference and to rush out the changes toward the relation towards the others. They constantly.
Yeah, whoa. The role of the ballot slow.
Yeah, it was not a roll of the ballot.
Oh,
it was a link on their roll of the ballot.
Got it, sorry.
It was a link on their roll of the ballot.
So is this on our?
It's all links. It's all links. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
The link is that their role of the ballot compartmentalizes it into different forms of regressive ideologies to eliminate difference and rush out the changes towards relations to the others that they constantly metricize different forms of discussions to fit the necessitation that they hold. Next is going to be on the framing.
Ours?
Mine.
Okay.
The framing is first the death drive is ontological motivation towards the action or inaction of the self in reference to death. The 8th point under this is going to be the drive of the self limit of inability to reach its end. The small causes of near death, but it will only continue to satiate the drive. The B point is going to be that it creates a unique double binding inside of ontology. The one is that the difference is continue in the minor supplements. The drive causing it to satiate itself and you're able to soften in one sweep. The second is that the drive continues to confrontation of the self and confrontation. It destroys the self and different forms of relation until you begin to create your environment towards the world around you. Next is going to be impacts.
Yeah, it's too real.
The first impact is disposition of the self and referring to the different forms of social interaction and advancement is inside of it. Then when you have a constant disposition, when you constantly deem the fact that everyone exists outside of you, everyone exists outside of you, it isn't for your own protection. That creates the different forms of divide that exist and last for you. One is not different forms of social advancement because you always deem that person is out to get you different forms of job and that allows you to be decreased away from different forms of social advancement or political advancement. The second is that it creates new form of looking glass effects where you're not looking at yourself, you're looking at yourself from the outside and how the different forms of people begin to view it and how that begins to have different forms of implications on your different approach. That means you approach interactions in relation to the other. You never see it as yourself because you are always outside the body beginning to see what different forms of interactions can hold. They hold most advantage to the people around you, not to yourself. That creates a unique form of disposability of the self. The second is that the death drive specifically necessitates for control and the ability to fix and destroy. That you can cross-apply a lot of the link arguments here specifically how the different forms of confrontation and control exist because of the idea that you have constantly to fix another person and fix the different relations that exist and that exist inside. Fourth is going to be that this specifically deems different populations as disposable. It allows for them to be deemed as existing outside of different forms of rationale that are created inside of the same way that genocide always creates. The reasoning is why those people exist outside of the first place is because we don't see them as existing inside of our own borders or inside of our own relations. That allows for this form of gratuitous violence to happen. In the first place. Fifth is going to be that this specifically turns the entirety of the case from the entirety of the cases specifically with different forms of genocide. Our argument is on why this genocide happens because of different forms of relations that exist inside the world are always a paradoxical notion of how the different forms of familiarity work in the first place. It's not that they exist so far away from you, it's that we refuse to let them come inside us because we're always enacted in a different form of protection to create and keep the other out. Anything else you want?
No.
All right. CX. Here you go.
So your alternative is a lack of alternative. Can you explain what that means in the context of the app?
The context of the AF is that we get rid of the relations you hold and allow for a void to be there for relations to...
So we shouldn't have a relationship to violence?
We should not have a relationship to individuals that allow violence.
What do you mean?
What do you mean?
Are we not complicit in violence in the room?
Yeah, we probably are complicit in violence.
Okay, so we
It's
shouldn't
just a
have a
question of how we
relationship to
change
self?
that.
What do you mean?
It's that the relationships between the self and the other is what creates that violence. It's that the relationship between the subject and predicate is what allows for the manipulation to happen in the first place.
Okay, so explain to me what that means in the context of affirmative that prevents a disjoint between subject and predicate.
Is that the way that you posit genocide is problematic
How
inside
so?
relations? That was my genocide thing specifically, is that the way that genocide is always used as a different term instead of just killing, is how we always posit ourselves as existing away from the other.
So would you posit that killing one person is the same as killing 100,000 people?
I mean, why isn't it called mass killing or?
Don't you think it's whiteness to say that the death against like 5 white people is the same as the death against millions of black people?
I mean, the argument isn't, it would be that the death of millions of white people.
Why do we
is the
focus
same.
on the violence that happened in France rather than the millions of deaths that have happened as a result of U.S.
I mean,
imperialism?
our argument isn't on what we focus on, it's simply the language that we use when we talk about
Okay, so
issues.
what language should we have used instead of calling it genocide?
Killing, probably.
Okay, so we should, so like, someone killing is bad, right? Like, are all your links representational?
All of our links are specific to the representations of the act.
Okay, great. Why is focusing on discourse and the definition of discourse important in the context of genocide?
To change relations that allow genocide to happen in the first place.
How?
Because the different reasons that genocide happens is because of your ability to relate to the other. You push them out and deem them as disposable.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, the order is going to be the aff frame on top, and then the order of the aff, and then the criticism. I don't even know what, shit. You know, I guess we'll just say,
Just go in the same order.
yeah, we'll go in the same order. So I guess it goes the alternative, the links, framework, and then the impacts.
By case framework, you mean like the bottom stuff,
Yeah,
that
the
whole
solution
stuff,
balance.
okay.
So I hate to be that guy, but can you repeat that?
Yeah, no problem. It's the aff framework, so like the ethical solution to violence, the affirmative, and then the alternative. Then
When you say
the,
affirmative, is that like the advance?
Yeah,
the advantage. And then the alternative, and then the links, and then the framework and the impact. The frameworks and the impacts. You want me to read that on
When
framework?
you say framing,
Yeah.
do you mean
Their
Okay.
framework.
Yeah,
the
there.
stuff that starts with death drive, or do you mean their framework?
So,
You're fine, this is why I'm asking.
our framework, the advantage,
Yeah,
K straight down.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work out, I don't care.
Everybody ready? You good? Alright.
Conceded 100% of the affirmative. If we win any ink on their roll about, that means that you default to the ethical solution of violence as a way to be able to, as a way to evaluate this round, which means you can extend that across now. You should, as an adjudicator, evaluate as the most way to evaluate an ethical solution of violence. We say that violence is occurring systemically within the country of Burundi now, which means that it is your ethical obligation as an adjudicator to prioritize that first. And yeah, so you can go to the affirmative now. Extend across the entirety of this. And our articulation is that genocide, that the propensity that genocide would necessarily happen is rapidly increasing. Sabotage by the end of this month. The government plans on 11/30 to pass an anti-terrorism law which allow them to uniquely crack down on the dissidents which have political concerns. This articulation would ultimately devolve to genocide, and our articulation is that this is uniquely problematic. You can extend across that genocide is ultimately incalculable, and that our articulation is that genocide is probably the absolute worst impact, and you should prioritize it as at the top of your moral calculus. That is extended across. That should frame that should frame the entirety of the criticism. If we win any ink on the criticism, that means that the entirety of the affirmative win conceded. That means that we should win there now. You can go to the alternative. First argument, are you good? Yeah. Okay. First argument on the alternative is going to be nihilism. This had the ace pointed that you literally do nothing. The lack of doing something, the lack of an alternative means that you don't do anything. That's necessarily problematic because it doesn't give us the ability to necessarily say what things are problematic or what things are. Or it doesn't give us the ability to act on things that we might necessarily are problematic. You can extend across out of the cross-examination. Why necessarily this is problematic? Because then we couldn't act on the death of necessarily 1 million black people, but we would act on the death of 5 white people. But additionally, the next argument is to cross-apply the entirety of the affirmative as a disadvantage to this, because if we don't act uniquely in this instance, that is problematic because that will allow for the genocide of millions of people. We specifically tell you that this genocide has the potential to devolve over the entire African continent because the North, South, East African, and Central African stand by force would ultimately be able to check this back. But additionally, the next argument is going to be that a lack of an alternative wouldn't necessarily allow us to transfer away. You just stop in this one instance. That doesn't mean that every other instance means that we no longer have the exchange that you would necessarily critique, which means that the alternative is just a particular which Zizek himself would perhaps reject because you're not renouncing the entirety of ideology. This is just a particular reformism, which means you're not actually doing anything within the context of this literature. But additionally, you said the absence is a unique way to create anything, but our articulation is that the absence of something is now, it would allow for a right-wing co-option whereby you see the political, whereby an actions of action or an actions of necessarily occupying a field on a certain political issue or on a certain issue would allow for the right wing to be able to take over, to allow for the worst endless atrocities to be able to be justified. But additionally, you say a lack of absence isn't always good. Absence of conflict mediation is what leads to genocide. Absence of conflict mediation is necessarily problematic because that's what allows for things like genocide to happen. You can cross-apply that from the affirmative, but additionally the absence of necessary, absence of anything else, food? No. Yeah, keep going. Anything else? What else do you want to know? Start reading this stuff.
Okay. Is this on the alternative?
Yeah, just keep going. That's fine.
Okay, the next argument is going to be turn psychoanalysis. This makes solving violence ultimately impossible because we're too obsessed with confronting the problems of the
self.
Of the self. That's Western privilege, i.e., we would necessarily psychoanalyze ourselves and solve those problems without solving the other problems. But additionally, the next argument is that psychoanalysis is necessarily authoritarianism because it's thought mapping, whereby we would say that a class of individuals would be able to act like this is what justifies massive amounts of endless atrocities, whereby we can put individuals into camp because we say that they're going to act like a certain way. This justifies all sorts of atrocities. But additionally, the next argument is going to be turn disposability. That the impacts are bad. That without the ability to say that impacts are bad, that life would
No, like the disposability impact that they read is bad because it suggests that value to life is malleable. That's what leads to genocide.
Yeah, they say that disposability. They say that what?
They say that disposability suggests that value to life is malleable. It's not. There's an
they
infinite
say
value to life.
disposability is what makes life malleable. There is an infinite value to life inherent within individuals. Presuming this is ultimately dehumanizing, we would say it was ultimately dehumanizing. But additionally, the next argument is that turn height theory by itself is ultimately an ivory tower. Whereby you purport theoretical I suppose observations that are not accessible to 99% of the population, which is in turn itself. But additionally, the fourth argument is going to be a permutation do both. The ace point is that would ultimately shield the links and allow for fluid representations. Is that what you wanted?
Yeah.
It would allow for fluid representations, but additionally, the fifth argument is that discourse focus is ultimately bad. The ace point is that Rwanda proves that a discourse focus is ultimately problematic because discourse is what necessarily allowed for the red tape to be put in place, which would allow the genocide to be considered inevitable. But the beast point is that the definition of representation. I don't know what that argument is.
Like the definition, like the debates over whether or not we should use the phrase genocide to apply to specific violence is what made us not.
The definition of what specific term we should use to be able to apply these things is what allows for endless atrocities to continue to justify is exactly what allowed for things like the Sudan and the Rwandan genocide to be able to happen. But additionally, the sixth argument is that genocide. What is this?
Let me see.
Genocide. God damn, dude, I can't read your fucking handwriting.
Oh yeah, genocide is an affectively different impact than just one killing. Like people
genocide is
experience
obviously an affectively different act than just a single killing. A genocide is based uniquely off of, say, I don't know, like an ethnic cleansing or religious belief that individual might subscribe to, which makes it uniquely different than other acts of violence. But additionally, the next argument is
they make an argument about the inside-outside dynamic leading to genocide. Inside-outside dynamic is the status quo in Burundi. We solved that.
Yeah, the inside-outside, the inclusive exclusion is what is happening within the status quo. The only way to stop that is to be able to send forces there to be able to check that back. But additionally, yes, your question quickly.
Why is ethnic cleansing different than genocide?
Oh, wait, what?
Why is
That's not what we said. We said genocide
is
is different than just like killing one person.
why
Like
is
it's
genocide
affectively
different?
experienced.
Is genocide different than ethnic cleansing?
What?
Is genocide different than ethnic cleansing?
Ethnic cleansing is a method of genocide.
Okay. What do you want on the? Okay, is that it on the alt?
They say the role of battle
Permutation shields the links. Like,
permutation shields the links to the entirety of the criticism, but additionally I'm just going to go to the framework now. You can go to the framework now. The first, you want me to do these arguments?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the first argument is going to be the policies. The first argument is going to be policy simulations, ultimately going to be good. The ace point is you can contemplate nihilism. This had off the alternative. That is necessarily problematic in a world where we can engage in anything that would necessarily lead to nihilism. But additionally, the second argument is that policy simulation is good because it allows us to know the inner working of the government. This allows us to be able to perform things. Specific example, this is Neil Katyal, who debated at Harvard. He debated at Harvard, and now he's the minority who has defended the most cases in front of the Supreme Court. He specifically, like Hamdi versus Hamdan, he said that policy simulation allowed him to be able to do these things. But additionally, the next argument is that policy simulation is going to be able to determine things like consequentialism, because establishing ethical determination as the only reason for doing a policy is necessarily problematic, because we might have gone into World War II for economic concerns, but we ended this thing called the Holocaust. And globalization advocates might have the best interest of sweatshop workers in mind, only to see them get sold off as sex-slave workers, which means that only consequentialism, the affirmative, is the way to be able to ethically determine things. But additionally, the next argument is that you would necessarily see the political. I've already made these arguments. You can cross-apply why that's problematic. That I don't want the strategy of the masses stuff.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the next argument is that role playing is ultimately good because it would allow for a strategy of the masses. This allows for the hyper reality to ultimately be able to simulate it, and it allows for it to be pushed to its logical extreme. It has to be business as usual in order for the system to be able to burn itself out, becoming oversaturated with images, which means we are able to solve this. But additionally, the next argumentation is going to be that
They can't solve their death drive argument because they assume that everyone relates to violence the same.
Oh yeah, they can't solve their death drive argument because they assume that everybody relates to violence the same. I'm missing a sheet of paper.
This one.
No, not that one.
But additionally, the next argument on their impacts page, you can go to the death drive. You can go to the death drive argument. The death drive is ultimately inevitable. This is the crux of their impact argument, and the death drive is ultimately inevitable because the death drive doesn't exist because of the identification of difference. It exists because of biology. The death drive exists on a biological level because we are alive. Excitation is what relates to the death drive. We are excited within this biological fear is because our cells are not meant to be alive. The only time the death drive is nil is when excitation is zero, which is when biology reaches its endpoint, which should be death. That is the only way to solve for the death drive. But additionally, the next argument, you say populations are disposable. They're only disposable in a world of nihilism, only disposable in a world where you don't act. They are only savable in a world where you do act. We are counter to the entirety of the criticism. We say that they're nihilistic, and that's probably
Make them prove the reason why Rabbi has it. I'll say it.
So I don't think it surprises anyone. Okay.
I thought you were going for case.
Jesus.
8 minutes to do case arcs?
Game on Golden Answers, bloody impact turns on all of it.
It's actually gonna be a new sheet.
Not what it is.
It's gonna be 8 minutes of impact turns to nihilism.
No.
I'm gonna go in the order of, does the order matter since you flowed straight down?
I did not go straight down.
Oh, okay.
I'm very sorry.
Cool.
Okay,
It'll be-
signpost hardcore then, because I did flow straight down.
Tell you what,
I have this on
go
3
straight
sheets.
down and it'll be in order on my tabs.
Alright, well I'm gonna start with the framing page. All signposts, if you don't know where I'm at, just say, I don't know where the hell you're at.
Your framing?
Sound good to everyone?
Wait.
Your framing?
Yes, our
For
framing.
the one with the alt on it, right?
No.
No.
We're
Okay.
the death drive.
Okay,
part.
yeah, actual framing.
I know what you're saying.
The sheet I labeled framing.
Okay.
So you're going the death drive shit.
Yeah, where all of
And
the
then
Where all the
everything
policy
else-
simulation
where all of the policy
Yes.
simulation crap is.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you have those in the same spot.
Mine's no difference.
God damn it. Alright.
Any questions, just be like, where the hell are you?
I'll just say wait if I'm having a problem.
I even gave you a moment to stretch your
If
fingers.
it's excessive, I'll give you like 10 seconds or 15. I don't know, we'll make it work.
Okay.
In other words, don't fuck it up.
Future reference, I'm flowing straight down, I guess, for these dudes.
You should always slow down if we go one off. It makes the most sense.
Everyone good?
Yeah.
It was good.
They say we entrench nihilism, however, policymaking already is nihilism in the first place, i.e. the way in which groups can decide that they're not a part of civic violence that's happening in the status quo because certain language deems them as part of an outgroup. We are the only ones that call this into question, which means that we're an internal link term to the way in which nihilism operates inside of policymaking. The second argument that I have is consequentialism can exist outside of policymaking, which means that all of their consequentialism arguments are non-unique, even if you're going for deciding on an ethical framework, you would still have to do that inside of a mode of consequentialism, otherwise you would never be able to weigh the impact. They say that we say the political, however, to response to the first one, the political has already been ceded by to the right wing to continue to do violence or allow violence to continue to go on unquestioned. The only way in which we can break away from this is to question our relationship to the other and people who exist outside of our normative scope of justice. They only by doing this can we ever change the way in which political making already operates. They say role playing, however, role playing is simply spacing yourself from violence that you are that we are complicit with. I.e., you need to recognize your own understanding to the way in which you relate to the other before you can ever pretend or role play as an actor and then try to understand their relationship to the other. They say that we don't solve, however, however, we don't have to solve for the entirety of the death drive. Our argument is only that we need to change the relationship that we have to the death drive, even if it's biological. It's still only a question of what we do in the face of the existence of the death drive before we can ever solve.
It's only biological and the different ways that telos is
It's
formed.
only biological in a different way that telos is formed.
I'll explain that.
Michael will explain that in the PMR.
How convenient. Go ahead.
Also, disposability, they say disposability exists only in a world of nihilism. However, this is specifically untrue, especially in the world of policy making in the status quo, i.e. Rwanda genocide in which we didn't do jack shit about until it was already too late because it wasn't a quote-unquote genocide. Another few examples in which this has happened is the Bosnia-Croatia conflict. There are two specific instances outside of this. Well, the first one is that NATO decided not to get involved because there was a whole bunch of violence going on, but we just considered it an ethnic conflict and decided to stay out of it because the Balkans has historically been a war zone, so we deem them as part of the outgroup. This is specifically bad in terms of policy. Terms of policy making.
It's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah. K1.
No.
On the alternative,
Thank you.
they say that our alternative is nihilism because we aren't doing anything. That's not our alternative. Our argument is simply that the lack of an alternative is the only way in which we can make an impossible demand into the way in which that drive naturally operates, or the only way that we can slow down or stop the symbolic exchange. Mike's going to probably give you more analysis because I don't understand voter as much as he does, but this doesn't matter specifically because we're not doing nothing. All of their arguments about nihilism are in the context of the affirmative alternative not doing anything. However, our genealogy specifically the way in which we relate to inside in-groups and out-groups is the only way in which we can ever talk back for these kinds of impacts.
I have a question. Where
Yeah.
did the 1 and C perform in genealogy?
I think our argument is specifically an insight into the way in which, like, our link arguments are probably in the context of questioning the way in which representations naturally shape.
It's not a historical interrogation.
It's not
Probably the wrong
yeah,
word.
genealogy is the
Just
wrong
keep
word.
going. Genealogy is probably the wrong word. Scratch that part.
They say that the affirmative is a dissent, however, the only major impact that they're going for, specifically in our case, is genocide, which I think the alternative has a pretty high chance of solving for, which means that they don't get to necessarily weigh their app as an independent dissent to the affirmative. It's only a question of what we can do in the face of genocide and be able to check back for it. They say that the only way in which we can break away from this normative structure is by stopping the symbolic exchange. Again, Mike's going to give you like a lot more.
Also, we don't give a shit what Zizek says.
Also, we don't give a shit about what Zizek says. Like nothing about our lit is specifically
Our act of
Zizek.
impossible exchange would be an action
Our
that's
act of
irreplaceable.
impossible exchange is something
act
that
is
would be
irreplaceable.
irreplaceable. The absence of an alternative, specifically the impossible demand. They say that this is going to get co-opted because nothing happens. However, our argument specifically is that things happen in a world without an alternative because it's the only way in which you can slow down the symbolic representations that we exchange.
Answer ivory tower there.
Yeah, on their ivory tower argument. The ivory tower argument doesn't make a lot of sense in specifically this context. In terms of in-groups and out-groups, it's a very simple argument in the fact that we have an outside relationship to the fear of the other. This kind of discourse can specifically get called into question by a large amount of people. People will like naturally call into question why we deem like people of color specifically bad. This is an example of where you can question in-groups and out-groups. There's no reason as to why specifically our psychoanalysis is bad just because the solvency mechanism for the alternative is in the basis of psychoanalysis or their quote ivory tower. That doesn't necessarily mean that the way in which we solve about that or the link arguments that we're making itself is naturally inaccessible. They also don't really give you like a large amount of impact analysis to this links. We isolate a few links. The first link that I'm going for is the military-industrial complex and the way in which they reform, specifically the way in which they reform it, i.e. thinking that one military action, specifically by splitting up different groups and then solving the problem for them is a form of is a mode of reform, which means that violence will still continue to happen. You can classify the Croatia and Bosnia, the Croatia and Bosnia analysis I did above. This is specifically checks back for this because in terms of international actors going in to solve for places and problems, the violence continues to propagate itself because no one ever questions their relationship to the in groups and the out groups. Yeah.
So NATO didn't go into Bosnia?
No, our argument is that despite NATO going into Bosnia later in the conflict, that doesn't necessarily do anything because it doesn't solve.
So it seemed like they should have gone in sooner. So it seemed like they should have gone into the conflict sooner.
No, it's just a question about how they related to that in the first place. On the permutation, actually, no, still on the links. The next link I want you to extend is our third link argument, specifically in the way in which the genocide is specifically propagated. It's a specific symbol in which is exchanged, which allows. What was your post-humanism argument under this?
Because it allows for groups to be divided.
It allows for
inside
groups
of it.
to
How
be
we
divided
don't
inside
How we
it.
have to create unique ways to identify
And
the
we have to
killings that
create
happen without understanding
unique ways
the
to
whole
understand
holistically.
death. So this argument is very simple. The idea that we need to label things differently is what naturally prevents conflict. The good example that they give in the 1AC is that, oh, well, we didn't invade here because we didn't call it a genocide. But our analysis is that shouldn't be why we don't go into conflicts. Our analysis isn't that you should have to use specific words to prevent things, but rather the killings themselves that are happening is naturally bad. They're going to say that there's a difference between the 1 death and 1,000 deaths. But no, 1,000 people are dying. 1,000 people are being killed. You don't need a different name for that. You can say that 1,000 people have lost their lives. On the permutation, they shouldn't get fluid representations. They say that you should hold them to the speech artifact of the PMC. That this is specifically good for our link arguments, but it's also the only way in which you can call practices and policymaking into question. Which this fluid representations would also probably turn the real world policymaking claims, because it's only when you are able to defend the epistemological and ontological representations that you propagate can you ever call these into question. Which means that it either turns the real world policymaking claims, or it doesn't solve. All of the links are just ends to this anyway.
Alright, or it'll just be an overview. Make that say anything, please.
Okay.
New sheet.
Just create a new sheet.
Probably easiest for you.
1 second.
Yeah. You got time.
Taking-
Huh? Oh dang, that's not good.
I'll just say,
It's because it's a Lenovo.
shut.
I had that exact same laptop. It was terrible, and then it got stolen.
And then you got a different laptop.
We're ready.
No, I'm
I think I saw it.
Damn.
That's why I'm like chilling and not trying to look over.
Silly pop
That's
square.
bro.
Yeah, I got it. You are good.
Alright. We good? Alright.
This debate's going to be an easy ballot for Missouri Western for 3 big reasons. The first is that the links are always going to be a reason why they can't get a permutation. I mean, I read 6 of them and they didn't even answer one of them specifically. The only one they actually began to try to answer was a genocide one. But even if they win that, we still have 5 other links. I'm going to go to the genocide link here specifically and do a little bit of the work that Chris talked about is why the different formulations of killings are the ability for us to constantly deem groups as existing outside of our contingencies, different ways that we have to have different forms of classifications to justify the reasons we go to war in the first place. Is the different ways that relations shape the idea towards death and death in the different relations toward that, and towards that begin with. Next is going to be the military industrial complexes, different ways that we use it, just the hydrates, different way that we constantly say we have to have different forms of protection towards the self and close off from different forms of relation. Next is the telos link.
This telos link is able to answer back a lot of it. It's that we constantly have to fix different problems. It's a watch example I gave. Is that we see the other as existing as an automaton that's not able to fix themselves, but constantly has to have an outside influence to come in and change the different workings of them. It's the same analogy that we use to nature, and the reason as to why we constantly destroy it, because it's not able to fix itself. Just as your watch breaks in one cog in, it can't fix itself, so you either have to fix it or you throw it away. The relation to the other is that they have something broken inside of them or with their relations, so we either go in and physically fix them or we destroy them. That's our disposability argument on why populations are deemed as disposable, is because we deem them as either have to be fixed to be able to hold value, or we deem them as that to be destroyed. So that's why they're never able to get a permutation. That's my exact rhetoric coming out of the LOC. Next. Is they're not going to be getting a turn onto any of these arguments when none of them are highly explained inside of the MO. MG, close enough. I don't care.
First, I'm going to specifically address the different ways that they turn our arguments, but they're not in context with our solvency mechanism. Chris does a good job talking about the differences between impossible exchange and how that creates a unique form of radical openness to allow for an understanding of the different forms of relations and how they begin to operate and allow for a contingency to create new forms of relations. All of their arguments are
like, look, even if they win any of their argumentation, it's not in context for what our alternative does. They've compartmentalized it into where we are a complete lack, to where we don't change anything. Our argument is that lack of an alternative is what resists the different forms of social political implications and allows for an impossibility to be exchanged. And that creates a unique form of radical openness, because when you make demands upon the symbolic that are not able to be commodified and that can't actually be traded, that creates these fissures that allow for radical openness to see these relations in a new light, and that these forms of relations and how you see people as existing further away from you is what allows for different forms of otherization to happen. Third, is even if they win any chance that there's something wrong with our alt, they have to win that we don't solve their AF. The entire framing is on their genocide impact and how we're able to solve back for the different relations that allow genocide to happen in the first place. Is that the different reasons that allow for genocide is that they're pushed to the periphery. That is verbatim language coming out of the PMC, is that we push them to the periphery and don't care about the different forms of violence that happen to them. That's why the genocide goes to the entire continent. But our argument is that that genocide is caused by the different forms of relations and how we hold them to a different standard than we hold ourselves. Is that they have anything wrong, then that means that they are there to be destroyed. And we're able to solve back to that. Anything else you want, Chris?
Yeah, like, even if they
Also, don't let them go for this VTL turn. That's like dehumanization and mystification. We're not VTL at all.
Okay.
Like, just on a side note, because I could see them going for that. What else?
like, even in their role of the ballot, like, we are, like, solving for the
Even
app
their
and
role of
an
the ballot,
ethical
we
decision
solve for the app and
relationship.
an ethical decision for relationships, and more relationships in the app. If anything, we solve more than the affirmative does with the different ways that we relate. The relationships work to allow for war and different forms of gratuitous violence to happen more than just so on genocide. It's a reason as to why these different forms of dynamic attacks happen to begin with.
Point of order, sorry to end the speech like that, but any articulation of how the NEG captures the role of the ballot PMC is entirely new.
I mean, I think our
Our
analysis
arguments, we
is
solve
all-
the app, so we meet the role of the ballot.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that. I'll let you consider.
Okay.
Senator,
Can I, okay, first of all, lower the
Oh.
goddamn table and get it done.
I just wanted to see if you could speak off of the table instead of
Like at my eye level.
entire time rolling.
Go to the
the whole debate.
Good.
That's why my MG was bad.
I don't know what arguments I'm going for, but I imagine I'm going for something.
Alright.
If you see them all at once, maybe something will pop out.
Overview?
Sure.
Anything will work.
Is this the last round today?
Our
Yeah.
framework, the probability shit, the advantage, and then I'm just gonna talk about shit, I guess. I don't, like,
I'm floating this all on a new sheet.
like, I guess where I'm going
Just
to
vote
start
on the
is on
other
the
overview.
alt page,
Oh yeah.
I think,
Okay.
and then on the,
Did you vote straight down for it?
I did.
No worries.
Okay, I will signpost
You're fine.
what argument I'm going for
You're
at
fine.
least.
I'm proud that no one had to say, where the hell are you, Chris?
You did.
I even gave you a moment of dissonance for your sneeze.
Everybody ready?
Yeah.
No rule of ballot extended to the block if you conceded too much offense in the debate. The ace of point is that you conceded that absence is bad in a world where we don't have conflict mediation and Burundi. That means that we have to have an alternative, not just a lack of an alternative. That means the permutation is try or die to be able to solve the affidavit. The ace of point is also if you conceded the argument that disposability impacts are bad because they create a notion that valuable life is valuable, which is what creates the ability for population to become quote unquote disposable in the first place. At least in genocide, this root cause of your criticism means the affirmative is tried out because it doesn't actually abide by any of this bureaucratic bullshit that you talk about definitional debates, but just simply cuts through the problem and actually solves the issue. Now go to the framework around. I want you to sit across the roll of ballot. Indicates that we endorse you have to endorse an ethical solution to problem violence. The first argument is that ethics have to come first. We have to challenge systems that ultimately create pressure, allow for them to be remain invisible. Their criticism ultimately makes it impossible for us to actually have any kind of action because we've labeled it wrong. That means that they'll criticize you for not having the correct representations. This makes it impossible for us to be able to act in the future. But also, if the affirmative has any risk of being able to solve the genocide, you should evaluate that person who considers the genocide is a unique form of incalculable form of violence that prevents us to be able to actually be able to solve that. You consider the entirety of the affirmative. Give the PMR a whole lot of fucking weight here. They don't talk about the app whatsoever. You conceded that in absence of conflict mediation in the status quo and that impossible demands by the government and the opposition is what making solving the violence impossible, which means that your criticism is the problem, including the affirmative's action to solve the lack of conflict mediation and also the impossible demands being made by both sides in the in-group and the out-group is the reason why the alt never solves the app, but also the app is try or die. Go to the alt page now. Your answer to the permutation doesn't make any sense. You just say that you should hold them to the links of the affirmative, but I have two reasons why you shouldn't. The first argument is his use of the word genealogy in the 2 and C, which is an example of why representations are fluid, because you didn't know what that goddamn word meant, but then you wanted to say, it's not the right word, but we'll explain it later, which meant that your LOR is an example of how representations actually function, that there is a subjective inconclusiveness to the indeterminacy of language. If that is true, that means that if there is violence of any kind, call it whatever the fuck you want, happening in Burundi, that the affirmative is critical to be able to solve that, which means that your only argument is that it would turn policy questions because reps being fluid. That doesn't make any sense. Investigating representations does not mean that we can't, like if reps are fluid, that just means we have to have discussions about what those representations mean, including the plan, would ignore all the representational bullshit and just fucking do the plan. Now, I also want to extend across two specific arguments here that I've already made. Well, the first disposability impacts are bad. You have literally made the argument that indicates that people can be deemed disposable and that has an ontological value as it relates to the human being, which allows for them to be able to criticize populations as being the other, and that the otherness is important. That relationship is what allows for genocide to happen in the place where it means the root cause of your criticism. This is damn, this is conceded, damn, this is conceded. The LOR concedes it. That means that there's no ability for you to be able to vote negative. Now, absence is bad. They have conceded the argument that the absence of conflict mediation in Burundi is what allows for things to be able, like Rwanda, to be able to happen. Not having a strategic planning, being able to solve back for genocide is what actually results in these problems, not just we didn't psychologically interrogate ourselves and bullshit and how we fucking relate to it. Guess how we relate to it right now? We don't. We don't give a shit. We have representational, rhetorical discussions about whether or not it's actually genocide, and then we don't fucking doing anything, which is why the permutation is critical. You can have representational discussions that question or in a relationship with the other, but also include the plan's action that actually solves it. You don't have a single reason why the affirmative would not legitimately result in a solvency for the genocide. Now, the last argument I want, on this page, is that psychoanalysis is bad. You consider the argument that it's thought mapping, and that your only answer to that is that our psychoanalysis isn't that bad. That didn't mean anything, and also psychoanalysis is psychoanalysis. You have assumed that entire population is malleable into one psychological construct which entirely ignores the function of culture and makes it impossible for us to have any kind of understanding of differentiation. This is a form of whiteness whereby you centralize and reduce the entire African continent to one psychological mindset. Is the structure that allows for Western inventionism and other forms of shit that is super fucked up. Link to
And also straight turns to criticism.
Yeah, straight turns criticism. Link debate. Ignore literally every link argument. The plan does not try and solve the military-industrial complex. The plan does not try and do whatever it is the hell they say it does. We literally say there's violence there. We have to solve it. It's probable. It's happening now. If you don't do it, people die. That's important. You've conceded that it's important. Now, also, they make an argument that says that genocide is a symbol. Genocide is not a fucking symbol for persons of color in Africa. Your articulation of this is the perfect example of why your criticism doesn't make any sense. It's because you haven't interrogated your relationship with genocide. You have simply interrogated your relationship with the PMC. You don't have a single instance of why we ought not try and solve violence. If there is true, then you should vote affirmative. Now, the bottom of the framework page, I guess.
Okay.
Extend across the argument that indicates that our representations are, or rather, no, that's not the argument I want. Oh, yeah, the last one. They say that policy is nihilism because we didn't go to Rwanda and because we didn't go to Bosnia. Our entire app is about how Rwanda is a reason to vote affirmative because we cut through the representational rhetorical discussion that try and convince us that something isn't genocide, which means that we don't have any interventions. Their self-investigation does not change that. The app is tired now.
Good job.
Yeah. I'm gonna grab some water.
I just finished flowing.
I just want to say, I know you do, but I really like your judging style of like saying, yeah, I'm here. Like that, honestly,
Yeah.
You all deserve that.
Way better.
For real, that is far and above.
Something I picked up from Joe Allen. Like, y'all deserve to know what's going on.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
being able to know